a programme for today, but this is quite an emotional day actually for me, because I've been trying to get Pete here for a long time, and it was lovely that when Damien called me earlier this year to say that do you think it'd be possible to get Pete Greig to come here, it really gave the impetus, and it's really God's blessing on. So it's the right time for you to be here, Pete, and it's lovely for you, and also I've known Pete for a number of years, but it's lovely to meet Brian, lovely to meet you this morning as well. The other thing before we get started is I want to say it's lovely to see so many old friends from different churches here today, and I really sense we're in a season of unity now, and it's a wonderful thing. We've got Ealing Church kindly sort of hosting today, but there's loads of different churches have been working together to put this on. So there's from the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Baptists. Who else have I forgotten? Put your hand up if I haven't mentioned you. But lots of different churches involved. And a lovely lady called Sheila, who I met today this morning, was telling me about a picture that she'd had of the bride's dress having no seams in it. Isn't that a lovely picture? Yeah. So anyway, this next session, the first session, I'm going to give you a short interview for those of you who don't know Pete and Brian. We're going to have a quick 20 minutes. They'll then launch into the first talk, and after that there'll be an opportunity for you to ask them questions. You know, some of you, I'm sure, will have already read their books and be very familiar with the 24/7 movement. But firstly, if I can invite Brian and Pete, if I can invite you to come up. Stand, or should we get some chairs? Yeah. So, Brian is the International Director of Prayer for 24/7, and Pete is also International Director of Prayer for 24/7 and founder. He's also the Senior Pastor at Emmaus Road in Guildford, and also Vice President of Tear Fund. So, I thought just to kick things off, Pete, I'll just ask you, 24/7, how did it start, and what's happening now?
Okay, small question. It is so lovely to be with you. That was the most amazing time of worship, wasn't it? That was thank you, Darren and the team. There's obviously such a hunger and a thirst in this part of the world. And we're just thrilled to be here and hopefully throw a few logs on the fire. What was the question? Okay. So, I mean, it's an amazing story, because my life kind of got hijacked by prayer, of all things. My wife Sammy and I were busy planting churches and having a good time with that, and then really I just became so sort of spiritually hungry to know God better, and I started to get worried that maybe I'd spend the rest of my life on a kind of Christian conveyor belt, going through the motions, and actually something deep within me wanted to know God in a much deeper way. And so we began to pray, and some of the impetus behind that was when I was a very long-haired student hitchhiking all around Europe. We ended up in Portugal. We hitchhiked all the way along the Algarve. If you've ever been there on your holidays, it's very good. The south coast of Portugal there, with the sea on our left, the land on our right, and we would light fires at night on the cliff tops and cook fish, and then we'd swim in the sea the next day. It was great. It was me and my friend Nick, who's very tall and very handsome, and all the girls of Europe basically fancied him, and I just sort of followed him around like it's me. And we ended up this amazing moment where suddenly the ocean appeared on our right as well as our left, and the land narrowed, and we were on the most southwesterly tip of Europe, called Cape St. Vincent. And we pitched our little tent and thought, this is pretty cool. We're the most southwesterly people in Europe, you know. The Romans thought there was nothing beyond this point. It's the end of the world, you know. And here we are. And in the night, I couldn't sleep. Got up, and I was something about sort of this sort of geography of the place. I felt like I wanted to try and pray. And I remember I turned and I faced south towards the Mediterranean Ocean. I imagined Africa. And I raised my hands and started to try and pray for Africa. And I turned with my back to the tent and I looked out at the Atlantic Ocean. And I imagined America beyond, and I began to try and pray for America. And I turned with my back to these two oceans and began to pray for Europe. And as I did so, this thing happened that I actually didn't talk about publicly for several years because I was worried everyone would think I was mad. But I received a vision. My eyes were open. There wasn't a band in the corner playing on E minor the whole time or anything. I was there on a cliff. But what happened was I began to hear this buzzing noise, and I began to shake violently. By the way, if you're going to shake violently, a cliff is actually and I didn't think it was a spiritual experience. I thought I was getting electrocuted by some cables, but of course there weren't. I looked up to try and find out what was going on, because there wasn't any. And then what I saw was like a schoolboy atlas, open, with all the maps of Europe, and then going right through into Eastern Europe, and then even Russia and down even as far as Afghanistan to the Middle East. So I saw these countries, and I just saw coming out of the page of the atlas this. I can only describe it as an army of young people, crowds of young people just coming out of these nations. And I'm there shaking away, seeing this thing, thinking, what is this? And I don't know how long it lasted for. And then I spent the next few years trying to make sense of that. What is that thing I saw? And not really knowing what to do about it. Often when you get a big vision, it's hard to know what to do about it. So you just go really small, really practical, began to do some youth work and bits and pieces. And then when we started our first prayer room, a number of years later, and the Spirit of God just came, and amazing things began to happen in the prayer room. People, atheists were coming and experiencing the presence of God. A girl called Sam got saved one day and spent an hour or two in the prayer room the next day. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. You've only been Christian 24 hours and you've just done like a 2-hour prayer time. She said, I assume that's what Christians do. So I just lied. I said, yeah, we all do that. And a little girl was healed of leukemia, and there were people said they saw angels in there. It's just amazing things happened. And then the prayer room began to spread, and it hasn't stopped spreading ever since. And we're now in over half the nations on earth, and we've been praying non-stop for 19 years ago, our 20th birthday next year, and all sorts of amazing things have happened. It's not just going strong; it's growing faster now than ever before. And you said what's happening now very, very quickly. Lots of opportunities in Christian unity. A lot of work with the Catholic Church. The Spirit of God is doing something. We see it here today. Different churches coming together. We're seeing that all around the world right now in an extraordinary way. Lots of openings into schools. Our Prayer Spaces in Schools initiative is growing exponentially, turning classrooms into prayer rooms. And lots of communities, monastic communities. I just found out this week we've got 70 of those now around the world. So lots going on. And it's been a really wild ride. And it's still weird at family, like marriages and funerals. People say, what do you do with your life again? And you're trying to explain it. But I got hijacked by a prayer movement. It's really good fun.
That's great, thank you, Pete. So Brian, I'm just in the middle of reading your new book, Gate Crashing, which I'll give a couple of plugs through, definitely later on. This is available in the bookshop. Brian's been involved with 24/7 for a long time, but he's had an amazing time out in Ibiza, and perhaps, Brian, particularly, you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I've been involved with 24/7 Prayer since the beginning, and probably the main reason I got in was I kind of felt slightly sorry for Pete as he got overwhelmed, which is not the best way to get involved in any kind of prayer movement, but it worked. We're still here, 20 years later, we were young and handsome, and now we're grey, but these things happen. As you all, well, not all of you know.
In Asia, when Brian's quite often in Asia for us, they all think he looks like David Beckham.
Honestly, it's the best place to go in the world. I go to Malaysia and they're like, you look like David Beckham. Anyway.
He actually looks like that bloke off the royal family, you know that?
See, Pete, you just isolated yourself from some of the audience there. And I was a church pastor of a church in Diss in Norfolk, just outside Norwich, a charismatic new church. Oh, did someone go woo-woo? And I said Diss. Anyway, it's great. Not a lot, actually. You don't get a lot of Diss stuff. So yeah, and I was a charismatic new church, a growing church, and we were just really inspired by what was happening with 24/7 prayer. So we started a 24/7 prayer room. And loads of stuff similar to what Pete's talking about started to happen. We were seeing people who were having problems with self-harm coming in. Somehow God was just touching them, healing. There's all sorts of incredible stuff. And so in a church, just working away, doing what we do, doing what we're called to do. And I'm really a firm believer. What was it that Arthur Wallace said? Every great revival is born out of prayer. Every great revival brings forth prayer. Every great revival is sustained by prayer. And so as a church leader, I really grasped that, because I think we often church leaders outsource their prayer life of the church. So I wanted to really pray. So we really dug in, praying loads, and in the middle of that, and through a whole series of miraculous events, God called us to go to Ibiza, which at the time, I know everyone used to go, oh, Mediterranean island, wonderful. At the time, a newspaper had termed Ibiza as Sodom and Gomorrah. It had more pubs, clubs and bars per square mile than anywhere else in Europe. And so Pete asked Tracy and I if we would go, and we've been sending prayer teams to Ibiza. Because here's the thing, prayer and mission, they go together. They're inseparable, just like breathing in and breathing out. There's nothing you can do. They are linked together. So in the end, we felt called to go. Pete asked us to go. So by the way, Brian, we haven't got any money. Do you remember that? Yeah. It was such a great offer. We were eating soup in a restaurant in America. It is still the same message, but never mind. And so Tracy and I, with our two sons, we moved to Ibiza in 2005 and set up a work out there, prayer room right in the middle of that. We saw incredible stuff happening. We were praying maybe with probably about 1,000 people every summer who wouldn't call themselves Christians. We developed a thing called a vomit van, which was we take people home and they get covered in vomit, because God takes me home all the time and I get covered in my own mess, doesn't he? And so we did that, and we just established a work which has grown. We trained up other leaders. I was out there for a month in August this year, and it's a phenomenal thing where we really are making a difference in the community. You know, the question you need to ask yourself as a church is, if you disappear tomorrow, would the community around you miss you? So what we planted and established in Ibiza, born off the back of prayer and mission, was a valuable asset to the community that people loved, and that we saw transformation. So it's no longer got the most pubs, clubs and bars per square mile in all of Europe. It's no longer referred to as Sodom and Gomorrah, because God is doing stuff out there. So we spent, I'll talk to you more about it in some of the sessions. I could go on forever, and I don't want to steal your time or anything like that. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and God is just at work. He's just wanting us to go into these dark places. So when you pray, and one of the titles, one of the straplines to Pete's book, Dirty Glory, is "Go where your best prayers take you." So sometimes we're praying for the brokenness of the world, we're praying for the need of the world, and God sends us there. So we went, and we had a blessed time. We've been back quite a while now, about 6 years, and do all sorts of other strange things now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got one last question. There is going to be a Q&A session later on this morning, so do think of any questions you'd like to ask these guys. They've mentioned to me something amazing that's happening in Vienna, but I think we'll save that for the next session. But just finally, Pete, you said you've got a vision for 24/7. I think it'd be great if you could just share that for us before we go into the first session.
Our vision is to play our part in reviving the Church of Jesus Christ and rewiring the culture. And as Brian's already said, every transformational movement of the Spirit through world history began with a movement of prayer. In fact, the church got born out of a 24/7 prayer group, so this is kind of how it works. And right now in this country, and Brian will probably share more about this in a bit, we are seeing a greater mobilization of prayer than has ever happened in any of our lifetimes, whoever the oldest is, any of our lifetimes. That's not exaggeration. We've checked the facts out. This is bigger than mine. Jesus is bigger than. We're seeing vast numbers, and around the world, churches are feeling this extraordinary call to seek God in prayer in an unprecedented way. And what we always say is, you know, the great miracle is not when God answers a prayer. The great miracle is when God's people pray. When we finally stop trusting in programs, rebranding exercises and everything else, and just get on our faces and cry out to God and ask Him to do it. And that really, truly is what we are seeing. And I mean, today is just a part of that. Wherever we touch down, we find that there's this hunger for God and this prayer that's rising up, let your kingdom come. And so I'm sure, I mean, Brian, why don't you just say something about the kingdom come? Are you doing that later?
Briefly. I work one day a week. I work at Lambeth Palace at the Archbishop of Canterbury, so I'm an international ecumenical lead for an initiative called Thy Kingdom Come, which was basically born out of an inspiration about an event that we had in Vienna 3 years ago. We had an evening of prayer and worship in St. Stephansdom in Vienna. Lots of wonderful relationships brokered by Pete and different people over the years led to us gathering together 5,000 people, Catholics and Protestants. My wife did a Bible reading. She was the first Protestant lady ever to do a Bible reading in that cathedral in 900 years. So we're talking about stuff that's... so off the back of that, Pete ended up meeting Archbishop Justin, having a little conversation about wouldn't it be good if we could do this in some cathedrals around the world. Pete said, yeah, Archbishop Justin was great. Pete was, we could do it in 3. Archbishop Justin said, let's try and do it in 5. Did it in 6. And it's amazing. St. Paul's Cathedral, Canterbury Cathedral, the church gathering to pray and worship. And then the following year, 34 cathedrals. And then this year, in June, we saw 1.5 million people gather in our nation to pray. And here's the prayer: that God would send His Spirit to empower the church to go the works of evangelism. Just keeping it simple. 1.5 million people. You know, we didn't even get those kind of prayer meetings when there was a war. You know, so when Pete says there's stuff happening here, it's phenomenal. And now it's moved into 125 nations, 65 different denominations, gathering around Pentecost, asking that God would send His Spirit to empower His church to go to works of evangelism. So numbers aren't everything, but they are an indicator that God is on the move. Genuinely on the move.
And so just to wrap up, you know, is this everything we're praying for? No. But is it something? You better believe it. And I think we're all learning that you don't pray out of nothing into something. You try and find the sparks of what God's doing. You pour petrol on it. Yeah. That's how it works, right? If you by celebrating what God has done, the little things God has done in your life, or your church, or your village, or your town, you will find faith for the things He hasn't done yet. Okay? And so when we hear stories about millions, you know, turning out to pray, is it everything? No, but is it something? Yes. And so we've got to lay hold of this and say, God, if you can do this, now do the next thing. Does that make sense? And so we all need a bit of encouragement, don't we? Well, there is a lot of encouragement out there. So, and being with you here today is a part of that. So encouraging. It's an amazing time of worship. And great to see churches coming together in this way.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, guys. Good. So, don't forget, we've got one book on the bookstall, Brian's book, which is all about what happened in Ibiza. I'm in the middle of this now. It's a fantastic book. I can't put it down. Do encourage you to get hold of a copy of that. Pete, unfortunately, hasn't brought in any books, but I'll talk about those a little bit after our Q&A session. But Pete is a brilliant writer as well, so there's 3 books particularly I want to recommend to you, but I'll do that a little later on. So I'm going to hand over to Pete now for our first session.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeremy, very much indeed. Yeah, I'm so sorry, I'm very disorganised. I came on the train and I forgot to bring any books.
but you can get them. You can probably get them quicker on Amazon. Probably if you order them whilst I'm speaking, you'll have them at your house when you get home. And depressingly, probably even cheaper there. But yeah, we are so excited to be with you today. Thank you for giving up a Saturday to come and do this. And we're not really here just to sort of talk. What we really long is that by the end of today, you're feeling more encouraged. You're feeling clearer about maybe some areas that you've got questions in, more equipped to pray. We long to see every church in this area, ones that are represented here and ones that aren't, become houses of prayer for the nation. Just powerhouses that are transforming, radiating out into villages, towns, and even the nation. And we know that great things are happening. We know many of you are already praying in extraordinary ways. And I always say, what we're experiencing with 24/7 is your fault. If you've been praying for years and years for God to do something, we are harvesting where you have sown, often in tears, and we're grateful for that investment. But I hope we can be encouraging to you today. And what we're going to do then, obviously we're going to be thinking about prayer, because we believe that this is the primary thing that every Christian is called to do. But it's one of the things we all find quite difficult, so we're going to be honest about just how do we do this, how do we grow in this. And on top of that, this is something we see the Holy Spirit calling the church to do right now around the world. So we need to get on our surfboards and surf the wave of what the Holy Spirit is doing. And so we're going to think about this together. And we're going to do it by journeying through the prayer that Jesus gave us. How there couldn't be a better framework for thinking about prayer together. And as I say, our prayer is that as a result of today, you will go deeper in your relationship with God. That you'll experience more peace in areas where you maybe don't feel a lot of his peace. That you'll learn to hear God's voice better as a result of today. And even that you'll experience more breakthroughs in answer to your prayers. I remember when Sammy and I were first married, we moved into a little house, and whilst carrying boxes into the house, we met the neighbour, who was an old man. He was out in the front of his house, and we got chatting to him. And I came in and I said, "Oh, darling, I've met the neighbour, and his name's Roy." And she said, "No, I've met him, his name's Ray." I said, "No, it's Roy." She said, "It's definitely Ray." I said, "It's definitely Roy." So we had this Roy, Ray thing. And we never quite resolved it. And we spent 3.5 years calling our neighbour Roy. And once you're like a year in, you can't go, "What's actually your name?" It's just too late. So it really matters, doesn't it? Listening well and communicating well. Nicky Gumbel, who many of you will have come across, is the sort of pioneer of the Alpha course, and he writes a daily devotional called The Bible in 1 Year, which is brilliant. It's an app you can get on your phone. It takes you through the Bible, and there's commentary every day from Nicky. "Hi, Jesus is great!" Lots of enthusiasm. And 2 million people use the Bible in 1 Year app. And he said to me about a month ago, he said, what the one day out of the whole year that is always the most downloaded, the most read is? He said, by a country mile, is the one called How to Pray. That's the question that Christians are asking more than any other. And so we're going to look today at how we approach God, and we're going to think about the first few lines, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." And then we're going to think about intercession. Let your kingdom come, let your will be done. How do we do that? And then we're going to think about how we listen to God. Give us this day our daily bread. That's about literal bread, but also spiritual food. And then we're going to think about spiritual warfare. Deliver us from the evil one together. So that's sort of where we're going. And then tonight there's going to be a big old prayer and worship celebration together. So let's read together, shall we? Luke 11, verses 1 to 2. I think it's coming up on the screen. It is. We only do this to stop you referring to your Bibles on your phones, because if you do that, you'll end up playing Angry Birds whilst I'm speaking, and then you'll go to hell. So, I'm not joking. That's not a joke. It's theological. No. So, Luke 11, 1-2. One day, Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples." And Jesus said to them, "When you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come." And we'll do the second half later. First of all, notice that the disciples come to Jesus and say, "Would you teach us to pray?" To grow in prayer has to begin with this moment of humility and vulnerability where we just go, we need some help with this. The disciples went on to have unbelievable prayer lives. They prayed and rooms shook. They prayed, for their persecutors. They prayed and people were healed. They prayed over handkerchiefs and miracles happened. They prayed Peter out of prison. They had incredible prayer lives. But it began at a moment in time with this humble, vulnerable question: we need help with this. Lord, teach us to pray. And Jesus didn't reply by going, "Honestly, you don't know how to pray? I mean, it's pretty basic. Have I chosen the wrong people?" Jesus could respond more generously. It's like, "Oh, I've been waiting." And he gives them the Lord's Prayer, which is a pretty amazing response, isn't it? It's like, they estimate that 2 billion people pray the Lord's Prayer on Easter Day every year alone. It's arguably the creed. 300 years before the Nicene Creed, the creed of Jesus is almost certainly embedded in the Lord's Prayer. And so he gives this wholehearted response. And when we come to Jesus and say, I find prayer difficult, would you teach me to pray? He responds wholeheartedly to us. And then notice verse 1. It says, one day Jesus was praying in a certain place. So there's something about the fact that they saw Jesus doing it that inspired them to say, we want to learn to do that too. Because he's a rabbi, he's formed his rabbinic school, and the way that it worked, it was fairly common for rabbis to have their little bunch of followers, their disciples, who'd follow them around, and they would learn the way, the teachings of this rabbi, and then they would go and they'd become rabbis, you see. It was how they got trained up. It's like going to university. And it's a big thing. If like a big cheese rabbi says, "Come and be one of my disciples," a big thing. And they're like, right, we're Jesus rabbis, and then eventually we're going to go and become rabbis. And Jesus, of course, has a slightly bigger vision than that. And they begin to realize if we are going to do the miracles we see Jesus doing, if we're going to teach the way, these incredible insights that Jesus has, the key to it all is his prayer life. He seems to get a download. He goes off alone with the Father, and he gets these insights, and he always comes back from his overnight prayer times with more power. You can do a little Bible study on that. Before he walks on the water, he's been up all night praying. Before he chooses the 12, he's been up all night praying. People sometimes say to us about 24/7 prayer, isn't it a bit extreme? Praying at night. And yeah, the answer is yeah, it is. But in a world where 1.4 billion Muslims pray 5 times a day, it isn't that radical to say to followers of Jesus, hey, once in a while, why don't you go without a bit of sleep and talk to him, seeing as Jesus himself considered that essential. And he was the Son of God, so you might find this helpful sometimes. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get heavy on you. And so they realised, the disciples never asked Jesus to teach them to preach or teach them to plant churches or fight injustice. The big question they asked was, teach us to pray. That was the key. So, well done for coming today. It's basically a way of saying this is far better than being at home base this morning. And then Jesus says, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. I want us to think a little bit about that as we explore approaching God. Father, hallowed be your name. I kind of wish we could rip away how many years of religion that you've got so that you hear this for the first time. Because in Jesus' day, They had a concept of the fatherhood of God, but it was a distant thing. And Jesus is coming in and saying, no, you can personally address God as Abba, Daddy, Father. And the disciples would have been like, whoa! That's so familiar. That is so intimate to approach God. We're all like, "Our Father who art in heaven." But this is like they are freaking out at this point that they are invited to speak to God in this way. But let me tell you a story then to try and, for all of us, we have to keep being amazed by the good news of the gospel. So let me tell you a story to try and help you understand this. When I have two sons, and when the first one was born, many of you will relate to this. I mean, it's terrifying, isn't it, when you bring the child home from the hospital and you're like, oh my goodness, there's no grown-ups anywhere. There's no manual, I suppose these days they Google, how do I raise my child? I mean, it's like, oh my... And I began to realise that this wasn't just a cute thing to do, that my entire universe has just shifted. I had been the centre of gravity. Then I got married and my wife and I, were the centre of gravity. And now it's no longer us. Like, we're there to clear up poo and stuff. And this little helpless, incontinent, inarticulate entity is the centre of our universe. We can't say, here's a credit card, here's the fridge, make yourself at home. It's like everything just changed. And Hudson, that's his name, began to do things to me that no human being had ever done before. I remember holding him in the air on one occasion. How you doing? He's laughing and I'm laughing. And this long, stringy bit of saliva went straight from his mouth into my mouth. It's like, oh no! And you're always rocking them, aren't you? To this day, you'll sometimes see me in Tesco's just gently rocking the cornflakes packet. And I couldn't just leave the house without military hardware. And you do this, don't you, to make them burp, and then they puke down your shirt, and you're so sleep deprived, you're like, oh, never mind, it's only baby's sick. And you go out in public with sick on you. And he woke me every 2 hours for a long time. He screamed in my face. On one occasion in the summer, I'm from an era when, growing up, teenage girls, they probably don't have posters anymore, it's all Instagram or something, but there was a poster that all the teenage girls had of a guy with a six-pack holding a baby. Does anyone remember that? One or two faraway looks in the room. And so I'm there, it's the summertime, I'm just in shorts and flip-flops, and I'm trying to change Hudson's nappy, and I suddenly have this thought that just for once in my life I want to be that man. Thanks for laughing. And I'm thinking, I mean, these things you don't share with your wife because you know that she'll laugh at you, but I just in my head, like, I want to be that. And I thought, well, he's just, filled his nappy, he can't need to go to the toilet again immediately. I don't go all the time. And some of the mums here are like, oh, you fool. And so I'm striding around in a very small little back garden we had at the time, sucking in my stomach, holding this naked child, trying to be the guy in the poster. Men really aren't this sad. And just then, the gates of hell were let loose. And something unbelievably smelly and hot came out of my son and ran down my leg, and I found a small puddle in my flip-flop later. Hudson did things to me that no human being had ever done before, and yet I found that I quite liked him. I loved him. And I have many good friends like Brian here, but like if Brian phoned me every 2 hours through the night, screamed in my face, spat in my mouth, puked on my shirt and pooed on me, I would struggle to like him. What's the difference? Father, exactly. And so I find myself saying to God, this thing where you say to address you as Father, presumably you just mean like theological fatherhood. You know, you don't mean this. You don't mean that you feel about me the way I feel about Hudson. Surely. You know, you're just there going, I love you because I am God. Why does God have that accent? I don't know. I love you because I am God, but I don't like you. You are disgusting. You know, I have to love you or the universe will go pop. You know, you don't feel this passion and this love and this forgiveness, do you, towards me that I feel towards him? And the truth is that you can scream in God's face. You can hassle him continually. You can even make him dirty with your sin. I can quote Romans to you at this point, but I won't bother. And he will just do what any dad would do. He will pick you up and hold you and cleanse you of your sin and love you. And so Jesus comes along and says, if you want to know how to pray, you must resolve this issue in your head and your heart that God likes you. I've been a pastor now for a quarter of a century, and I've been teaching on prayer for almost 20 years. And I would say that most people's number one problem with prayer is God. If deep down you think that God despises you and doesn't like you, is judging you continually, that you've got to somehow manipulate him and persuade him to do the stuff that you need someone to do, it's no wonder you don't want to spend time with him. So Jesus says you must start by understanding that your Father in heaven loves you, that when you step into his presence, he's smiling and not scowling. And Christian art hasn't done us any favours, because there's almost no depictions of God or of Jesus in which he looks anything other than constipated. And yet Jesus must have smiled and laughed. He was full of joy. Children loved being with him. He cooked breakfast for his mates. He hung out with real working men. He was a joyful being. And we have to understand that God smiles and loves us and cares for us and is more keen to talk with us than we are with him. When our other son Daniel was very little, I remember a time where he was just learning how to write. He'd worked out that these squiggles he saw everywhere were words, and he wanted to do it. So he would get a big red crayon and he'd write on any bit of paper he could find. But it was just nonsense. It was hieroglyphics. It was not, and he would come, he was very cute. He was about this high, and he used to have electrostatically charged white hair. And he would come to me and show me what he'd written, you see. And I'd say, oh, this is brilliant. As if he presented me with the opening chapters of Macbeth, Oh my goodness, it's a work of art. This is amazing. You're a genius, child. And so he came to me one day with a piece of paper that he had written on, and he handed it to me. He said, Daddy, look what I wrote it. And I took it as usual and said, this is amazing. Wow, you're so good at writing. And then he said two words that struck absolute horror into me. He goes, read it. What do you do? What do you do? So I stared at the bit of paper in absolute horror. It's nonsense. It's not even good art. It's like terrible. What? And then in despair, I looked at his little face, and suddenly I had an epiphany. I knew exactly what his scribbles meant, because I'm his dad. I mean, it's not profound. I could tell what he had for dinner. It was all still on his face. I thought about what's gone on in his day, and what are the weird little things that tend to go on in his head. And then I guessed what the scribbles meant. And he stood there nodding, and at the end he said, well done, Daddy. Good reading. And I said, thank you, because it was some of the best reading I'd ever done. We get so obsessed with finding the right words to say, the right form, the right theology in our prayers, But your Father in heaven isn't interested in you having the right vocabulary. Prayer isn't about chucking a thesaurus at the sky, finding new ways of saying the same thing over and over again. God's not interested in the outward form. He looks at your face and he thinks about your day, and he knows the funny little things that go round in your head like a goldfish circling the bowl. And he interprets your prayers. It is the heart that counts when you come before your Father in heaven. That's what Romans 8 says, that the Spirit of God is interpreting your prayers to the Father. He sees your heart. That's what Jesus was trying to say when he told the story about the tax collector and the Pharisee. And the Pharisee goes to the temple and prays all the right prayers. I thank you, God, that all of this. And then you've got the snivelly little tax collector who goes and hides in the corner, and he's there just rocking backwards and forwards, and he's crying, and it's not polite, tears. It's like snivelly tears with like snot coming out of his mouth, and all he's just saying to God, forgive me, I'm a sinner, forgive me, I'm a sinner. And Jesus, with a twinkle in his eye, and he's eyeing up the Pharisees in the crowd as he says it, he goes, it was the tax collector who went home heard by God that day. It's not about the words or the outward form, it's about your heart before him. I remember one of our early prayer rooms, there was a church in the Midwest of America where they set out to try and do a month of non-stop prayer, and the pastor said to me that it was his last shot. He was about to quit. He was sick and tired of being a pastor, and he thought, okay, we're going to go out with a bang, we're going to do a month of prayer. He was just desperate and trying everything. They were running lots of programs, and he was just longing for more. And so they decided to run this month of prayer, and he said, I knew we wouldn't be able to do it. So he said, I blocked out my schedule and put myself down to do at least 8 to 10 hours of prayer a day. And he said to me, and when I first met him, he was weeping as he told me, he said, I could hardly get any time in the prayer room, because people just were so desperate to get an hour in there. And when the story started to get out of what was happening in that prayer room, as people encountered God, as pornographic addictions were broken, as marriages got restored, as art crept all over the walls and the floor and the ceiling. He used to go, his name is Gary, he used to go and stand by the door on the hour, so as someone came out and said, what did God do in there? What did God do in there? Tell me. And then by the end, they prayed for 3 months. They couldn't even stop after a month. And he's still in ministry today because God broke in such an amazing way. But one of the, I think it was in the second month, one woman went into the prayer room there, and she came out and she said to Gary, I'm so sorry, I've broken it. He said, what do you mean? I've broken the prayer room. What did you do in there? She said, I didn't pray. He said, she said, we've been praying all this time and I've broken the chain. He said, well, that's okay. She said, I just cried the whole time. I didn't say a word to God. And he said, oh, darling, it's the best kind of praying there is. He reads your face. He sees what you've had for dinner. He sees the weird little things circling your head. He interprets these sounds we make, these words, these lack of words, into something that communicates with his heart. So isn't it beautiful that Jesus says that it all begins in prayer with understanding that God is our Father in heaven. Okay? Okay, before we move on, are there any questions or comments on that? They don't have to be, but just if there are, we'll pause and give you an opportunity. I mostly just tell silly stories. I spoke at a very big church recently, and the pastor took me aside afterwards. He said, it's very simple what you teach, isn't it? I said, yeah. Like I've been busted, yeah. Sorry. No questions? Yeah, come on.
How do you approach somebody that's having views of God?
Oh, such a great question. Are we being recorded today?
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. There are people who listen to my talks to try and... anyway. The question for the recording was what do you do if someone's father was abusive. And of course, it's not just that. Some people, their father's bad, has hurt them deeply. For some people, their father was just absent. There was a report a couple of years ago, I don't know if you saw it, it was reported on Radio 4 and everything else, about certain parts of the UK becoming what they called man deserts, because so few male teachers, so few male role models in families, and so for some people they've been deeply hurt, some people the father figure is just absent entirely. And the first thing I want to say is this: the solution to a painful relationship with a damaging father or an absent father is not to remove fatherhood, but to redeem fatherhood. And so one of my friends who had an abusive father talks very powerfully about the healing that she has found in understanding what a good father can be. Now, I'm not minimizing what a massive journey that has been for her, but the answer is for us not to back off and just say, oh, well, we'll gloss over that because we want to be sensitive. It's to say, oh, this is even better news for you. One really practical thing I would say, if you're asking a more pastoral question, is this. Jesus says at one point, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. So rather than defining fatherhood around our broken experiences of fatherhood, help people to focus on who Jesus is and what Jesus is like. And then once they fall in love with that, say, that's what the Father is like. So allow Jesus to be, if you like, the shop window onto the Father. Now let me be really vulnerable. With my own sons, who are no longer babies, they're now young men. And I did a deal with them. Once they hit their teen years, I said, I'm not going to tell stories about you without your permission. So I mostly tell stories about when they were little. And around the world, everyone thinks that my kids are perpetually like bonsai job humans. They've actually grown up. It's a miracle. And one of them can drive, which is good for my prayer life. But if someone comes up to me and says, Pete, you're not that great a preacher, I'm okay with that. I do my best. It's not perfect. Or, you're terrible at gardening, yes I am. Or but if someone said to me, you're not doing a good job as a dad, then that would really hit home. That's the thing that I care about most. And yet, I know I haven't been a perfect dad. There's times where I've been too busy when my sons have needed me more. There's times where I just wish that instead of going in with advice, I'd listened to them more. And there's times when I've lost my temper with my own sons, and I'm so ashamed of that, right? And I don't think I'm what people would classify as a bad dad. I think I've done my best and I'm okay, but I'm still not perfect. So the solution, even if you've got a good dad, you still haven't got a perfect dad. The solution for all of us is to find the perfection of fatherhood in God, rather than us just trying to elevate our own human experience and call it God. Does that make sense? So it's a really important question. And then the final thing I'll say on this, and it's a massive area, but is the Bible does talk about the motherhood of God. And for example, God is described as a mother hen, gathering his chicks under her wings, and for some people, those motifs around God's maternal characteristics are going to be particularly important, because while they may struggle with fatherhood, but they may really understand amazing grace modelled in motherhood, for example. So I'm not saying that we go the whole hog and sort of start praying our mother in heaven, because I think, as I said at the start, fatherhood has to be redeemed and not replaced. Is that okay? Really good question. I'm so glad you asked it. Okay, can we move on? How are we doing for time? We're okay. Just turn to the person next to you and say, your breath smells great. Okay? Okay. Next. When you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Hallowed be your name. The great driving passion in Christ's life was the hallowing of the Father's name. It's what made Jesus get out of bed in the morning. It was the thing that he cared about deeply. And a few years ago we might not have understood this well, but in our culture we now understand the hallowing of a name perfectly, because people spend gazillions on protecting their brand, protecting their name. Celebrities know that other people get rich in the halo effect of their own reputation. Your company will spend vast amounts on lawyers to protect reputation. We understand that your name is everything in the modern economy. Well, guess what? They understood then. It's partly, by the way, because we are moving much closer to a shame culture. An honour-shame culture is starting to rise in the West. Why do you think many rap stars talk about respect? There's something around reputation that actually we are getting closer to biblical times again. It's quite an interesting development. And Jesus knew the name above every other name was that of his Father, and he hated that his Father was ignored and disrespected and abused and manipulated for political ends. And his passion was that Father God would be hallowed, honoured, respected, worshipped and loved. And so, as followers of Jesus, we start to feel that. It's like kids in the playground. Don't you say anything about my mum. There's that passion for the Father. A number of years ago, there was a little chap who was a former soldier in modern-day Italy who encountered God. And you'll know him by the name Francis of Assisi. But then that wasn't his name. And he gave away all of his possessions, started praying like mad, and called himself God's juggler. And he was just this joyful little saint in the making. And everyone in his area, they didn't know who was Francis of Assisi. They just thought, he was the local merchant's son, has he gone mad? Is he bad? Is he trying to extort or manipulate people? What's going on? And so one of the local wealthy landowners, a man by the name of Bernard of Quintavalli, invited Francis to dinner and gave him a bed for the night. I decided he was going to spy on him, because he figured you can find out if someone's real by just seeing what they do when they're on their own. And so Francis had dinner, and then everyone went to their rooms for the night, and all the lights went out in the castle, and Francis jumped into bed, and Bernard spied on him to see what he would do. And what he saw was that as soon as the house had gone quiet, Francis jumped out of bed, knelt down by his bed, and he started to pray the same line over and over again. He started to say, "My God and my all, my God and my all. My God and my all." And he was weeping, tears coming down. My God and my all, again and again and again. My God and my all. That was his prayer life. And Bernard of Quintavalli was so impacted and impressed that he became the first Franciscan, the first disciple. He gave away his wealth, he gave away the castle, he gave away everything, and began to dress simply, and he began to follow Francis around saying, "My God and my all." Within a year of that moment, there were 12 Franciscans. Within a decade, there were more than 5,000, and within 20 years, by common consent, they had rewritten the history of Europe. Stalin, on his deathbed, said, give me 10 men like Francis of Assisi and I shall change the world. Francis changed history, but the heart behind it all was worship, adoration, my God and my all. The Westminster Shorter Catechism, you'll know, when they tried to summarize Christianity and make it simple for everyone to learn, the very first statement, and this took years for the brightest people in this country to come up with this, the very first statement is, that human beings' primary purpose is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And so prayer begins in worship, in adoration. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. And Brian's going to talk about intercession, and we're going to talk about other types of prayer. But you talk to the man on the street, say, what is prayer? They tend to say, well, it's just asking God for stuff. But actually, first and foremost, it is about worshipping God and celebrating who He is. When the kids were little, and I would travel a great deal, and sometimes I'd get home, maybe I'd been away for a week, and I'd come through the front door, and as I came through the door, the boys upstairs would hear me, and I'd suddenly hear something like this, Dad, he's not sharing! Or, what's for supper, Dad? And I would go, so nice to be back. All I wanted was them to come downstairs, look me in the eyes and go, hi, Dad, acknowledge my presence. And then say, he's not sharing, what's for supper? And there's a risk sometimes in prayer, we rushing, could you do this, that and the other, and we don't just pause and say, hi Dad, I love you. It's just polite. You know? Hallowed be your name. One of my dearest friends, his mum has advanced Alzheimer's. And he lives in London and she lives up north of here. And he dreads the day, and it's not far off now, when he will go and visit her and she will no longer know who he is. And we had a slightly weird conversation recently where he was saying, the thing is, there won't be any point in me visiting anymore. But obviously I will. This is a really weird thing. I'm going to be spending days of my life to go and visit someone for whom I'm just a benign stranger. But obviously I'm going to keep doing it. And I thought about that. I thought about how the Father must feel when billions of people who he loves more than life itself ignore him and don't really know his name. And yet he keeps coming, he keeps speaking not just to us but to your neighbours who deny his existence. He keeps trying to find ways of showing them his love. He's faithful like that, my friend visiting his mum. He's faithful, it's unconditional love. And I'm told that sometimes when people have advanced Alzheimer's, they can have moments of clarity. It's just like a passing thing, and suddenly they become sharp again. How beautiful it will be if that happens. I know it often doesn't, but if that ever happens for my friend, and he goes to visit once again with a heavy heart, and on this one occasion, his mum just looks up at him and goes, "Oh, Charlie, you imagine just to be acknowledged, just for his smile to be met with a smile and not a vacant look, what that will do in his heart." Now take that and imagine how God feels. In a world where the majority of people deny and ignore him, when you take the time to stand before him and call him his name and respond to his love with love and his smile with smile and his presence with your own presence. What joy you bring to the Father's heart when you worship. And so Jesus says we should pray, hallowed be your name. I'd love us now just to pray for a few people, because we're going to move on in a little while. But I'm aware that just these opening lines of the Lord's Prayer for some of us will have raised stuff around God liking us, around maybe areas in which we struggle to understand his love because of our own histories, our own pain, the attachments we failed to form in childhood. I'm aware that for some of us we may simply be wanting to articulate that prayer of the disciples, Lord, would you teach me to pray? It's like you're here in that space of saying that exact thing. Romans chapter 8 says that the Holy Spirit within us cries, Abba, Father. And so there's something of opening ourselves to the Spirit that enables us to respond to the love of God with love, the fatherhood of God with intimacy. And if Jesus says this is the ground zero, this is the context for everything else you go on to pray, I don't want us to rush on and start to talk about intercession and listen to God and spiritual warfare, because for some of us, we just need a bit of prayer to move something from our head to our hearts. Is that okay? So it'd be great to get the band back, if that's all right. Is there a program I could... Great, we've got 20 minutes or so. Is this where we're meant to be doing Q&A? Yeah, we'll do. I'll tell you what we do. Is there any other burning questions before we do this? And then we'll intersperse Q&A through the day. There was such a helpful question that was asked earlier. So just before I want to pray for some people and minister to anyone who'd like to receive some prayer. But are there any other questions, comments, or allegations? They don't have to be, but equally I want to make sure that no one's got like loads of stuff buzzing in their heads. Yeah.
How do you pray when you feel?
Say again. What did you say?
How do you pray when you feel?
What's your name? Maureen is asking such a great question. How do you pray when you feel empty? The first thing I want to say is this. We minister... No. Let me put it like this. More than half of the Psalms are not happy clappy, they are lament. They're not folk guitar, they're blues. They are, where are you, God? The word Israel means the struggle. You've been baptized into a fight. And so we don't always pray out of fullness, we often pray out of emptiness, out of desperation. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. And that very psalm got put to a horribly pretty tune years ago. Some of you will remember it. You know, and it made it sound like Bambi skipping around fancying a glass of Perrier. But actually, as the deer pants to the water, this is a deer in the wilderness who's dying of thirst, whose tongue is swollen, and if it doesn't get water, it's going to be just food for the vultures. It's desperate. It is dry. St. Augustine said, "Thou hast put salt on our lips that we might thirst for thee." So Maureen's question is a deeply, deeply biblical question. This dryness, this thirst, this emptiness, this longing, that is the place out of which we cry out to God. We don't pray because we've got it all together, we pray because we're desperate. And then the second thing is, we don't just talk about it, we do it. And Maureen, it's going to be very important for your friends to support you in prayer. Because there are times for all of us where we don't have any faith for our own situation, but others can support us in prayer. You might remember the story where Moses has his arms aloft and Aaron and Hur hold his arms up. You will need people to support you in prayer through this season as well. And so it's because of questions like that I don't want any more questions now. I just want us to get into ministry. For a start, I want some people